Hi there. Can everyone see me? I hope so. Well, this is, oh, great. This is a great thrill for me. Welcome to Club Book with John Moe. My name's Adam Wahlberg. I run a boutique book imprint in town called Think Piece Publishing that deals with mental health issues. And I think that's why the folks at Carver County Library thought of me to moderate this. And I'm delighted because I'm a huge John Moe fan. I first encountered John when I was living in Seattle in the late 90s when he was doing a show on public radio called Rewind, which was hilarious. And I followed him ever since through his books, through his podcasts, through his variety shows. I'm a John Moe groupie. So this is a great thrill for me. Before I gush over John some more, let me quickly read you some info on who is responsible for pulling this great event together. Club Book! Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, which is made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, which is part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Carver County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. So thanks to all those fabulous organizations for bringing John to us. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to The Hilarious World of Depression will be available in the comments section of this live feed stream. Pick up a book at their store in St. Paul or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're in the area. One final note, in the comments, you'll see a survey link. MELSA would greatly appreciate hearing what you think of this Club Book program, so give them a shout. It's quick, it's easy, and it's fun. And I think that is the backgrounder. Now we can get into the good stuff. John Moe. John is one of Minnesota's best known radio and podcast personalities. He's known for his work as a senior reporter and host of American Public Media Enterprises, including Weekend America, Marketplace Tech Report, and the variety show Wits, which I love and desperately miss. His podcasting projects have included The Hilarious World of Depression, in which Moe sets out to dispel stereotypes about depression, and has included such amazing guests as Andrew Zimmern, John Green, Margaret Cho, Will Wheaton, and my personal favorite of his, Jeff Tweedy, which is an incredible interview if you ever get a chance to watch or listen to it. Last year, John published a book under the same name, The Hilarious World of Depression, and in it, he shares insights from his personal experiences and years of interviews and research. Booklist says that Moe is exactly the right person to give an attentive, irreverent voice to those suffering with depression, which I totally agree with. So after a quick presentation and reading coming up here by John, we'll have time for an audience Q&A. So just drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them over to me. If you prefer to ask a question anonymously, you can also send a private message to Club Book here on Facebook, or send an email to clubbookmn@gmail.com. And now I will take a breath and say, please welcome the man of the hour, the wonderful John Moe.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate that. I get to learn so much about myself from hearing you talk about me. Thank you to Carver County Libraries and everybody there who's just been so great in setting this up. So excited to be here. I thought MELSA was just a version of Mensa for people who aren't good spellers, but I don't think that's true. And thank you to Red Balloon, which is one of my favorite bookstores deep in my heart. And now more than ever, and I'll just say this and then I'm going to go into all this, now more than ever is the time to support your local independent bookstore, because it is an investment in wisdom and kindness in your community, and what could be more important than that? And books are good. So it's kind of hard to know where to start when I'm talking about The Hilarious World of Depression. In the first draft of this book, I started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that kicked off World War I. And I turned in a manuscript that was twice as long as it needed to be. And my editor said, well, I think we can start with cutting World War I from the book. It was in the context, though, of how World War I led to World War II. World War II led to the Nazis invading Norway, which is where my parents lived. And we had a history of mental health issues on both sides of my family, all more exacerbated by the trauma of, the Nazis showing up and living in uncertainty for several years. It's trauma can bring out the worst in any tendency that is existing there already. So didn't want to start with that and the history of my family. So I just kind of wove in the history of the family throughout. I do write about how depression kicked in for me around 7th grade, which was a terrifying thing to happen because I didn't know what depression was. I sort of knew what the mood was, that it was sort of sad, but I wasn't sad really. I was despairing. I was terrified. I was immobilized sometimes, but I didn't know what it was. So I just thought it was a dark, shameful thing. I thought, well, this might mean I'm what we call crazy. And all I knew from crazy was that meant that I would be in a straitjacket in a padded room. Most of my mental health education came from Bugs Bunny cartoons. But sort of a top line view is that I struggled with various things and I couldn't really figure out why. I just knew that there was this other side to me that I really tried to keep hidden until finally in my mid 30s, this was probably even after Adam had heard me on the radio, still concealed then, but I was doing more radio stuff. I was married. We were starting to have kids. I owned a house, all the stress mounted and things started to really break apart. And I learned after my wife kind of encouraged me to go to the doctor to get this thing checked out, I learned that I had a thing called major depressive disorder, which was surprising. The doctor figured it out in about 2 minutes. He asked me some questions and looked me over and he said, yeah, this is depression. And I said, how did you know that just by looking me over for a few minutes? And he said, well, really, I knew when you came in, but this other stuff was just to confirm it. You're kind of easy. You're kind of not a very interesting case. You're classical. And I said, well, how long has this been going on? He said, how long have you felt like this? Since about 7th grade. John, it's probably been going on since about 7th grade. Again, super easy. And I said, okay, well, great. How do I get rid of it? How do I turn okay again? And he said, yeah, that's not really how it works. It's going to be a journey. We're going to find some things that might work. We could talk about meds. We could talk about counseling. We could talk about exercise and diet and meditation and prayer and all these other things that people are helped by. Hobbies. He said, they're not all going to work. Some of them won't work at all, but maybe we could find a few that do. And then those might stop working and then we'll find something else. And it's just a matter of managing it. And so I was kind of on that journey. And then I lost my brother to suicide. My older brother, Rick, died. And he had dealt with depression for longer than I had. And his was exacerbated by a substance use issue with originally marijuana and later on up to methamphetamine. And he died because he didn't get the help that he needed. And he didn't get the help that he needed because he thought it was his fault, all these problems that he was having. He thought that it was a weakness. He thought that it was a moral failing. He thought he just needed to be tougher. He thought that he just needed to think positively, and none of that works because depression is an illness that doesn't care about that stuff, really. It just wants to kill you, as it did him. And I was at his memorial and realized that we could, as society, we're given two options. We could not talk about mental health as we've been not doing. We can continue to bury it. We can continue to keep it a secret. We can continue to not say suicide when someone died by suicide. We continue to make up euphemisms that just shames people who are suffering. And if we do all that, as we've been, then people die, like Rick died, and other people are going to die. And I said, or the other option is, if Rick had talked to a therapist, if Rick had opened up about what was going on, if he had said, I'm in pain, I need someone to help me with my pain, just as if it had been one of the stomach ulcers that Rick had when he was a teenager from worrying, then help might be available. It's not a guarantee, but there's a higher chance. So don't talk about it. It gets worse. Talk about it, might get better. It's stupid. Let's talk about it. And I decided that, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a politician. No one wants to hear my concept album singing on the subject, but I can write and I can talk. And I've always been an anomaly among Norwegians with actively sharing my feelings about everything. What up, Minnesota? You know what I'm talking about. That line always gets a laugh in in-person readings, so I'm feeling it from your living room. And so I started to talk about it wherever I could. Twitter, Facebook, people would ask me to write articles. I'd do it. It started to spread. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm onto something here. And the more I talked about it, the more people seemed to respond in a way that they didn't with the various dad jokes that I would usually make. And what struck me is like, okay, maybe I got a way to phrase this that gets through to people. Maybe I have a way of demystifying some of this language. And at the same time, maybe people are starving for it. Maybe people really are tired of living with this shame of having an illness that they never asked for, because who the hell would ask for this? So I started the show, The Hilarious World of Depression, thought of the worst title I could, and my boss bid on it, and did that show for a few years, and it became very, very popular. And I was approached to write a memoir, and I said, well, I don't want to write a memoir. I'm not famous. Who cares what I have to say? And which was depression talking. And my book agent, who I've known for many, many years, said, I think you can help people, because when someone's your friend for a long time, they know what you respond to. So I wrote this book, and it's been a great journey to write it and a great journey to send it out into the world. And I know I'm helping people. So I'm going to read a little bit from it now. A memoir with some analysis and some issue treatment and various things along the way. So this takes place, the book opens in an office in St. Paul in 2017, 2018, right around there. So it opens very present day. And I go see a therapist named Julie, who, it's not her real name. She chose to not let me use it. And she's still my therapist now. This is our first appointment. I was in Julie's office because there was finally a critical mass of significant events in my life that made seeking help seem viable and sort of urgent in a prevention of dying sort of way. One was that I was turning 50, which is only still middle age if you plan to be 100. Frankly, the sands of my mortal life were falling into the bottom part of the hourglass, and I was on deadline before my deadline. Also lately, I kept wanting to not so much die as simply not be alive anymore. I didn't want to kill myself, God no, far from it. I just kept thinking about how nothingness, a nothingness in which I'm not even aware of nothingness, would be sort of delicious. This, even though the world has wonderful stuff to offer, like my family and ice cream and the NBA playoffs. I'd be driving to work or cleaning the kitchen or trying to sleep, and boom, there came the thoughts of longing for the void, a void that I fully understood I would not perceive, because that's the thing about voids. This feeling was morbid and yes, depressing, but it was also just pesky. What it really was, of course, was a mind that wanted to rest, but kept whirring along and pushing me to dark places. My unique brand of depression responds to stress. Specifically, it blows up under stress. When the going gets tough, I don't get amped up, I get despondent. I turn into a human version of a song by the Smiths. By the time I reached for the phone to call Julie for an appointment, I was basically Morrissey crooning alone in a darkened basement. Stressors included my soon-to-be high school senior son, Charlie, getting ready to apply to colleges, booking the next season of our show, and trying to do a good job writing the book you're reading right now. And yes, there's always stress in life. We all go through stuff. But the rate at which I metabolized stress into depression had gone through the roof. It was a brutally efficient machine. What do you have to be stressed about? The normies might have said. Normies are people who've never dealt with depression. You have a family, a house, a car, a good job, just deal with it. As if I could simply do that, as if I chose this, as if I looked at the options available to me and they were clearly labeled perseverance and freaking the fuck out all the time. And then I calmly said, yes, I select option B. Normies and saddies, people who have dealt with depression, are different, you see. Let's say there's a long bridge going over a high canyon, and there are two cars on it, one for the normies, one for the saddies. The normies are in a big land yacht of a Buick. It weighs a ton, low to the ground. When a stiff wind blows, the normies feel a mild push but continue driving, perhaps casually noting that it's getting windy out there. Then they go back to listening to, I don't know, Foo Fighters. The saddies are piled into a Model T with a sail on top of it for some reason. They see the wind coming, and it's all they can do to keep from being blown off the road and plunging into the canyon. The normies see the saddies struggle and wonder what the problem is, because to them the wind doesn't seem that bad. Try being more positive, the normies shout, as the saddies' Model T goes tumbling off the side, and the saddies deploy the parachutes they've gotten so used to wearing. I'd had good therapists in the past, briefly, but all I ever took away from therapy was a somewhat clearer understanding of how messed up I was. That's helpful, sure, but it's not really progress. It's like knowing the brand of refrigerator you're locked in. And this was not the fault of the therapists I had seen, who were all trained pros and good at their jobs. It was my fault, or Clinic D's fault, clinical depression, that's my nickname for it. I never wanted to go all that deep in therapy because that's where the monsters were. I'm talking about the really, really bad memories, the deep bruises, the scars, the events that significantly shape a person through injury. I'm talking about trauma. Rather than tackle the past, I was willing to settle for a tense ceasefire with it, letting my life be like Middle East countries that hate each other. There would be car bombings, I understood, but a homeland is a homeland. I had gone through life with the belief, often heard in simple-minded quarters of popular psychology, that the past is the past and you just have to move on. Let it go, the simple-minded say, again, as if no one had ever tried that before. Don Henley and Glenn Frey wrote a song actually along these lines called Get Over It. My response song would be called Fuck Off, Don Henley and Glenn Frey. I still hope to record that one day. I suspect most people who choose the willfully simplistic Henley Frey method are people who've never had much unpleasant stuff in their past to begin with, because this get over it notion is some bullshit. If you can't understand your past, then you don't really know how your mind got to where it is now, because you simply don't know yourself. So that's from the book. That's from the beginning of the book. Quick update. Soon after the book came out, we were in the midst of COVID. I got laid off from Minnesota Public Radio, who had produced the show. I didn't realize until I just did this reading right now that driving into that company on a regular basis was causing suicidal ideation. And at the advice of my lawyer, that's probably all I should say about what it's like to work at Minnesota Public Radio. But I have a new show coming out at the end of this month. It's going to be live. It's with a different network, and I don't think I'm allowed to announce the name of it yet, but it's going to be a bigger show. I'm going to do a lot more episodes, and it's about depression and anxiety and trauma and stress. And it's going to be 48 episodes per year. It's going to be a really big deal. It's the best work I've ever done. I'm so happy to be doing it. So I have a lot of love for this book. And that title might be retired, but the effort goes on, and the effort will go on as long as I have breath in my lungs.
Oh, I mean, I am so thrilled that there's going to be this, new forum coming out. I can't wait for it.
Me too.
Listen to all the pods, and I love the book. I just think it's wonderful.
Thanks.
So just to for the rest, 6:51, we'll probably do like a half hour of discussion, and feel free to send questions, and I'll fit them in, and then we'll just keep it real kind of conversational and wrap
nothing's
it up
off limits, Adam and listeners.
Yeah. So don't be shy out there. Well, I mean, you're very self-deprecating about the title, but I know I told you this before. I love the title. I mean, I follow this stuff pretty carefully, and you see a lot of campaigns out there, and they're all really earnest, and I'm in league with all of them. But they're all really kind of like, let's make it okay, let's fight stigma. And the minute you announced that you're doing this podcast called The Hilarious World of Depression, I thought, that's the way to do it. I mean, John's cracked the code. This is the way to make it kind of not scary. And but it's also, you're not shaving it off. You're not like being glib about it. The opposite. It's just the way you framed it. I think you did a huge service to the mental health community just calling that title. I think it's a genius title. I was going to ask you, can you remember the moment you actually, did it kind of crack you up, and then you sat back and thought, wait a second, I could really call it that?
That's exactly what happened. I was talking to, I say my boss is more a friend of mine than a boss, Peter Clowney, and I just thought, I mean, it was based in this thought of like, I know all these comedians who deal with this stuff. I've dealt with this stuff for years, and I've been a comedy nerd my whole life, making comedy, consuming comedy. I live for it, and part of it is just the reinterpretation of the world in a new way that makes you laugh. And most of what the laughs come from with a humane comedian is a recognition of something that you have in common that you didn't know you had in common with other people, right? And so there's always the line of like, he's saying what we're all thinking. And that's kind of on purpose. And so I would think about the sense of relief when a comedian said something that I thought was just my secret. Like the exhale of relief is where the laugh lives. Like, and then you just bounce it into a laugh. And so I knew there was something there, and I knew that there's a lot of intelligence in comedy, and so that seemed to be a good fit as well. And I knew a lot of comedians, and so that was going to make it easier. And yeah, like I thought, okay, how do I want to handle mental health? I could do, and I would still love to do a show like with the Mayo Clinic about what parts of your brain activate in certain, as much as they know, which there's so much about the brain nobody knows. But I thought, yeah, but if you say Maria Bamford's on the show, people are going to be more likely to download it. And Maria can talk about the direct experience, which is the foundation of certainly of the show I'm doing now, and in large part the show I did before. And so it's I always compare it to when my kids were young and had ear infections but didn't want to take medicine. I'd mix in the medicine with a little bit of strawberry ice cream, and then they'd eat it. So like the comedy is the strawberry ice cream that gets the medicine in you.
I think it's a great focus, and I think Maria Bamford's insights and some of these folks have really gone through it. And the book has got so many of my heroes in it. You got Andy Richter in there, you got Patton Oswalt, and I do pay attention to what they say because they're really intelligent, but they also suffer. And
I will say that the first guest on the new show is going to be Patton Oswalt. So that's our premiere. I haven't announced that anywhere else.
Well, that's exciting. I mean, he's lived, the last couple of years have been tough. So I think as fans of this, we've all been worried about his balance, but he seems like he has rebounded, but still, how do you ever really? So I'll be eager to hear what you have to say with him. Did you have any backup titles? I was just curious. What else were you going to call it?
Yeah, I mean, for the show, I didn't really have a backup title because I've got this thing. I love long titles. And I think it's because I've been writing for McSweeney's for so long that I like the sort of over-explained title for some reason. And then, I encourage them to decorate this. This is from the original tile design for the old show. I said I want it to look like a vaudeville poster. So like I wanted the entertainment to really pop into people's heads.
Oh, the branding's beautiful. And I follow up on the comics choice. Not that it's all about comics; it's also musicians and a lot of creative types, entertainers, songwriters. But I really respond to the comedians. And I was the question for you was that I was like, you wonder if, comics have this kind of reputation of being deep feeling and deeply bruised and struggling, or it could just be that they talk about it in a more eloquent and memorable way than anybody else does. Yep. And either way, the listener wins. So that's why I think it was just so great for you and so much time interviewing them. But I was wondering if you could comment on like the comedic mind. Is it that they're kind of just more interesting in describing what most of us have, or do they really have it maybe a little deeper?
I mean, I'm kind of agnostic. I sort of the original idea of the show was I'm going to talk to some comedians. I'm going to figure this out. Like I'm going to figure out, are depressed people drawn to comedy, or does comedy make people depressed? And there's no conclusive answer. And so like Patton says, there's no more depressed comedians than there are depressed dentists. And it's just that if your dentist talked to you about suicidal ideation, it would be bad for business and you'd want to get a new dentist. Actually, dentists are some of the most depressed people according to research. But then, other people like Dana Gould told me, yeah, it's kind of set up for a depressed person, the life of a traveling comic. You get to go on stage and have a conversation that you have rehearsed. So there's no risk. Depressed people and anxious people. You know exactly what you're going to say. People will laugh. You know when they're going to laugh. They won't say anything in return most of the time. And then, you could go back to your hotel room and drink vodka all night. It's a brilliant scenario. And so yeah, I'm kind of mixed on it. I think I tell you what I found is a lot of people who are first generation Americans are depressed and going into comedy. So like I've talked with Aparna Nancherla about this. I've talked with other people. And I think, when I was growing up, my parents were Norwegian immigrants. There was a lot about American culture I didn't understand and they weren't available to teach me. And so the whole world seemed kind of ridiculous all the time. Like, what are these strange rituals that are happening at my friends' houses? And, back home with my family, we watched Carol Burnett. We watched as much comedy as we could because, it was sort of a universal language.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved reading that in the book about your rituals around Carol Burnett. She certainly was for me. And I devoured 70s sitcoms. I can recite the Three's Company lineup.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's a way to cope. And I really love that this is your focus. I mean, there have been kind of these analytical neuro deep dives, and that's cool. Like Andrew Solomon did, like 8,100 pages on a Noonday Demon, and the conclusion was, and I love Solomon, but it really was what you said earlier. No one really knows. Yeah. No one there's no like immediate diagnosis. You really have to, treat behaviors and then just try things. And then
if I had a brain like Andrew Solomon's, I might have written that one too. Or if I was scientifically inclined, I might have written that one. But I grew up on the Jeffersons, and so this is the book you get instead.
Well, I love that you did it. I mean, you had mentioned earlier that you were wondering if this is a book people would be starving for, and I can say yes. I mean, I'm someone that has had issues with anxiety, and I've lost people to suicide, and these thoughts can be scary. And you introducing to folks who have gone through it. It's what you said. It's like, it's keeping it a secret that's so toxic. I mean, I used to tell people, I mean, the depression itself is a drag. You don't have much energy and you don't want to do a lot of things, but it's the shame that'll kill you. I mean,
Yeah.
being ashamed of having it, that is lethal. And that, I think you had in your book, the first step from saying, I should make an appointment. Like it sounds like your wife encouraged you. That's like a Grand Canyon leap for a lot of people, mostly guys. They just don't want to make that appointment. That's the biggest thing. If you can make that appointment, you're 90% of the work's done. But so many people don't. And so I think your book, making it not shameful, is such a service. And it's fun to read. It's not like eating your vegetables. It's great.
Well, part of the reason that I went in, I write about when I went in, and Jill said, "Well, I think you should make an appointment." And I said, "No, I'm just really busy lately." And she's like, "Yeah, you've been saying that for years now. Maybe this is just life and not a busy time." And I said, "Well, I just, that seems like too much to go in." And I said that I didn't want to pay the copay, which our insurance at the time was $10 copay. I wasn't worth a Hamilton to myself. I didn't think I was worth $10. And I said, I don't want to waste the doctor's time, as if that's anything other than that's what the doctor is there for, is to talk to people. And finally she said, "Well, okay, you don't want to do this for yourself, but do you love me and the kids?" I said, "Yeah, more than anything." She says, "Great, do it for us. Don't do it for you, do it for us." So that was a good move.
That was a good mood. Well, it's that thing you mentioned earlier. You're not even really, society seems to tell us it's something you're not even sure is anything. And so you don't want to, maybe you don't have great self-esteem and you don't, and you're awkward talking about it. It's hard to go in there and say what you need to say.
Well, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the illness to prevent you from getting help for the illness. The illness is protecting itself from getting caught. It's very sinister.
You lay out a lot of these connections in a very clear way. That's very helpful.
Thanks.
Well, we got our first question. The questions are popping in. I love it. Here's one from one of our viewers. How did your family respond when they learned your diagnosis, especially the hereditary components and what it might mean for them?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they mean family of origin or current family, but the current family, my wife was the one who suggested it, obviously, and we knew that stuff ran in the family and ran through like that. And then as my kids have grown up, I have my oldest is a sophomore at St. Olaf right now, and they've just grown up knowing that it's a thing you talk about. Like, okay, well, how's your mental health doing? And like, what are some questions we could ask to kind of evaluate it? So, they keep an eye on it, just like they try to remember where they put their shoes. We've made it non-mystical. And so that's been a real positive thing in my life. When my youngest was really young, she would see like the word depression printed somewhere and she'd be like, Dad, it's depression," as if it was a long lost friend. But my family is Norwegian, like I said, Norwegian American, and a lot of these things don't get talked about. And there is suicide in my family tree. There is all sorts of depression and a lot of kind of erratic behavior, and so it's all over the place. It doesn't get talked about a lot. And the hardest conversations I had to have were with my mother, because she grew up during the war, during imprinted lifelong trauma happening then. And then her husband, my dad, drank, and her son used substances and died by suicide. And so her concern was, I don't want people to think that I was bad. And I said, "No, you weren't bad. You did everything you could, and some things were beyond your control. Some things that happened to you were beyond your control. But the big thing I communicated to her was there are no bad guys in this book. You know, there's no villain in this book. There's no one being blamed in this book. It's about the abundance of mental illness and the effects of trauma. And there's a lot of love in the book. And so when she got the book, you know, she started hearing about it from other people who were reading it and saying very nice things about it and about her from it. She got a copy of the book and she put it in her closet in her apartment and just like covered it with a coat, I think, because she didn't want, you know, she was scared to read it. And so it was like this forbidden thing. And then finally she read it, started to read it and read it cover to cover. And she said, oh, it's so nice. I'm like, yeah, it's nice. I wrote it to help people. And now she's real proud of it.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. I mean, family dynamics are tricky on this topic. I mean, there with mine, I had just kind of garden variety. I was an anxious, hyper kid, you know, and it didn't catch up into me in my late 30s. But I grew up in a Swedish family, and boy, howdy, no one ever talked about this stuff to me. And and I would have liked that. I think I could have started earlier, doing the things I need to do. So
it all got sublimated into Ingmar Bergman films in Sweden. It's all there.
No, I mean,
who do you think's playing chess on the beach?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you don't want to turn to Max von Sydow for comfort, but you take what you can get. And we had, there was just this big interview with the royal family about like this poor Meghan. She went and was told not to go. She wanted to get hospitalized, and she was told it would look poorly on. I mean, that's medieval. I mean, that I can't. I would think we're past that, but we're not past that.
We're not past that. No, it's still, I mean, even like I've tried to kind of train myself off the word stigma, even because a friend of mine who's a therapist said, when you say stigma, you're just talking about discrimination, but stigma, we kind of dress it up a little bit and say it's about a particular thing. All it means is that you're judging someone not based on who they are as an individual person, but from your worst generalizations about a thing they have no control over. And you can call it stigma, but that's just discrimination. And so, that's something that I keep in mind. But like the first time I started talking about my own mental health in public forums, it was terrifying. I didn't want to miss out on jobs or opportunities or friendships because people thought I was unstable or dangerous, or thought that because someone has a mental disorder, they're not aware of the reality of the world, because except for a very few of disorders, you do. And it was completely the opposite. I've never had a single person say you shouldn't talk about this, but I've met so many people who come to me because of this issue, and that's what gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about that. Like when you went up on Twitter, I remember because I followed you because I've been a fan since like the late 90s. And so I remember when you did that, I think it was 2009, and that must have been really scary. But if I remember correctly, you just got a wave of support, right?
Yeah. Yep. Well, and again, it's the same reason that talking about this works. It's the same reason people, hopefully not the only reason, but one of the reasons people might buy the book is that they're hungry for it and that they're relating to it. And they're saying, yeah, that happened to me too. And so I've always framed it in like, here's my personal experience. And it just comes back 100-fold every single time. And that's what it's going to take. Like, it's going to take that in order to get to the point where mental illness is treated the same way we treated litter in the 70s or drunk driving in the 80s. We just all got together and said, screw this is terrible, let's change it. And so that's what we need.
I think we need a broad paradigm shift. It's like, wear your seatbelt. It can be as simple as take your meds. And I love your language as saddies and normies, like and I went public really on social in 2013, and it's people will rally if you let them. They're still scared, but
sure,
I've never regretted it. Yeah, I think that's the number one thing. That's a really good first step to think about. But I find normies boring. I got nothing to talk to with normies.
Oh,
I'd
now
much rather talk.
we're all normies and we're all saddies is the payoff.
I should categorize it, but I really do find folks who struggle and are willing to just share it, because again, they're 98% functional for the most part if they're lucky, but
Yeah.
they might have to treat something, and I'm like, well, I want to hear about that. So yeah, if anything, I have a stigma against normies, I think. So I had a quite yeah. I had a question. It's a kind of, and I bet there are people on this call who can relate. I can kind of relate on trying to achieve yourself out of the hole. And I really respond in your book to that. You have this great, like you are, and I'm sure you'll say that you're still struggling with wanting to do the next thing, even though you've had this amazing career. But that's just part of that's just a symptom a lot of people drag around. I drag it around. I just blew a lot of time and money on a master's degree I don't think I'll ever use, but I wanted to do it. But you had this great interview with Andy Richter, which you put in the book, saying the hole doesn't go away. In fact, the hole gets bigger,
Yeah.
the more you achieve.
The more you try to shove into that. I had and that's the idea, and I write about it in the book of like, if I just get this next promotion, if I just get this book deal, if I just get this girl to go out with me, that would be happy. And so how could depression exist when a happy thing has occurred? That's because depression as a disorder is not an emotion, it's a disorder. And so, I spent many years, and I still do it, I still think like, okay, this time I'm going to prove it. And like, I wrote a book and I'm like, okay, I need a second book in order to show that the first book wasn't a fluke. And the best example I found of this came after this book came out. I did an event that was based in Washington, D.C. I was at home, of course. And I invited a friend of mine as a guest on that. And his name's Sean Doolittle. And he was a pitcher for the Washington Nationals. He was their closer, and when they won the World Series. And Sean had started out as a first baseman, and struggled and got injured. And he said, here's what I did, John. I thought if I could just get to the major leagues, then, lifetime goal achieved. I'll be happy. All this, and he struggles a lot with anxiety and some with depression. This will all go away. So he gets converted into a pitcher. Suddenly, he's got a 95-mile-an-hour arm, makes it to the major leagues. With the Oakland A's, he says, this is great. I'm still not okay. Maybe if I make an all-star team, then I'll feel okay. And so he makes an all-star team. Yeah, but I need to prove that it wasn't a fluke by making a second all-star team. Makes a second all-star team, goes to the Washington Nationals. Maybe surely nobody who goes and plays in the World Series could be struggling with these things, gets to the World. Nobody who wins the World Series wins the goddamn World Series. And then he finally kind of had a come to Jesus moment with himself. And he said, and John, that's when I read your book, after the World Series. And I thought, oh, it's not the World Series. It's not going to solve it. But so many really smart people, me included, just never figure that out, or take a long time, or take a lot of reminding.
They really do. I mean, I've had this interesting evolution with the word perfectionism. I used to think, well, that's not me. I've never put that pressure to be a straight A person, although I like to achieve. But perfectionism also can just mean you're not being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
That's basically what it means. And boy, all these people that keep thinking they're going to achieve their way to, resolving this, it generally does. I always remember this quote from Prince, who said, after Purple Rain, he said, I made it to the mountaintop. There's nothing there. And then he slid into a real, funk is the appropriate word.
Funky funk in his
funky funk. Yeah. But so you really have to put in the work to kind of, what Richter says in your book is the hole's always there. You have to do your best to get comfortable with it.
Yeah.
It's not, the hole's the hole. Harder.
It's been harder during COVID because there's fewer things to use to fill the time. So But the thing
Totally
about
true.
perfectionism too, something I didn't understand for a long time is I always thought, oh, that's people who do things until they're perfect. But nothing is ever perfect. Nothing can be perfect, except maybe parts of the song "Give Me Shelter." But aside from that, and and so um, and so those are people who are just very frustrated at the impossibility of lining up their wants with their reality. And so those are people who don't make things perfect. Those are people who are just in torment.
And I see it a lot. My friends who are workaholics, and
Yeah.
but these things, sometimes that happens in your 20s and you figure it out later and you do your best. Here's a question from Facebook. Since there's all this entrenched stigma, do you have trouble recruiting guests for your projects around depression? It's so intimate after all. I'm not asking you to name names though, but do you have a hard time like, this person would be so eloquent, but they're not sure?
You can't see it, but I'm looking at a wall of Post-its on my wall right now. No, I mean, when I started the show, I went with a lot of people who I already knew and just said, hey, trust me on this. And so that's why Peter Sagal, Andy Richter, Paul F. Tompkins, Maria Bamford, some of these people who I knew, they're like, yeah, we'll take the plunge. We trust you. And yeah, there have been a handful of people who say, not ready to tell it right now. And then but we get pitched a lot of people. We get pitched people all the time who are like, yeah, I want to talk about it. I've heard the show. We get contacted by guests themselves who say, hey, I'm a fan of the show. And so the more people know my name and the more people know the work I do, the easier it gets. And so yeah, it's pretty gratifying. I mean, I did like something that I've run into a few times is I'll say, hey, so and so, I know you've worked with such and such. Do you think that that's a person who might want to come on and talk about their struggles, and could you introduce me? And they'll say, yeah, I can do that, but also I struggle with those things. So like so many people I've discovered that way. It's really remarkable. The one person who turned me down was a really good friend of mine, John Hodgman. I said, hey, John, do you want to be on this show? He's like, I'm so sorry. I'm fine. I've never dealt with any of those things. I'm feeling great and always have. I'm like, oh, God damn it. He's like, I'm sorry.
That's interesting because I know he was on Wits, and I would have liked to have heard him comment on it. And good for him that he doesn't have it weighing on him. Well, here's an interesting question that I think you can relate to more than anyone, because now you're in this kind of public figure role. Here's a question. I'm very transparent with my depression struggles. What's surprising is I've been approached for advice by friends and colleagues as if I were an expert on the topic. I'm not an expert and feel out of my depth. Is this something you've experienced yourself? Any thoughts on how to meet those earnest calls for advice?
Yeah, I always take pains to point out I'm not a doctor, not a therapist, but I used to say that a lot and avoid giving anything even smelling of advice. And finally, friends of mine who are therapists and listeners who are therapists would say, you've lived and you've lived through some shit. So, don't sell yourself short on your own experiences. I mean, people should know if they're getting advice from a professional or not, of course. The way I usually walk it is I'll say, well, in my experience, here's what's happened to me. And if you're struggling, if you're in the disorder territory, which is, I mean, there's nothing magical about the disorder term. All it means is that you're not able to live your life in the easy way you otherwise would be able to. Like if you're struggling, but you're still getting to work, getting clean, taking showers, food on the table, then you're just struggling. It might not be a disorder. If you're worried about it, go to a professional. If those basic things aren't getting done, might be a disorder. You should go talk to somebody, start getting a plan going of how you're going to address it. But in terms of like, how do I tell my family this is what I'm struggling with? I would just say, if that was me that they came to, I'm like, well, here's what happened when I talked to my family. Here's a way I wish I would have handled it. Here are the unique things about talking about this with my particular family. But I always tell people, like, it's your journey. I can tell you what happened to me. A therapist can tell you what they know. A psychiatrist can tell you what they know. The Bible can tell you what it knows. The Quran can tell you what it knows. But you're on your own journey, and be kind to yourself, and know that you're in the learning process, and that there's many steps to be taken.
Oh, there is. Yeah, I always say, if it's somebody and maybe what they like, and you are great in your book. You list albums you listen to at the end of the book that help, and all the rest. But those are just kind of the get you out of a short term. I mean, but the best advice is always see a doctor. I always, which just sounds like what you say, which is, and be willing to see. You were great in your book talking about how you had to see a lot of therapists going from your Seattle to Minneapolis. So did I, to get the right fit.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
you're
like
so
dating.
looking for help. It is, and people don't know that. You're so looking for help. You sort of think, all right, I'll work with this first person, and that often is not the way to go. But you don't know that.
And the other practical thing that I didn't know until a couple of years ago that I think is really valuable, like if you call to make an appointment with a psychiatrist, they might say there's a 5-month wait list. We can book you in September, or like something like that. And it's only going to get even more intense when people are recovering from the trauma going through COVID. Like there's a huge wave of demand coming and not much more supply. But if you're really in pain, if you're really struggling, go to a GP, go to a general practitioner, go to the family doctor, go to a clinic, go to an urgent care clinic. Those people can prescribe. They can find ways, often if you're in real distress, it doesn't mean you're going to take this med every day for the rest of your life, but they can get you something that might get you to a more stable place and come up with a plan for you to get longer term help. So, the American medical system has a lot of flaws, and one of them is the wait to see a psychiatrist is just preposterous. If you're young and smart, you're wondering what to do for a job, become a psychiatrist. You'll work forever and you'll make a lot of money. But if you're in distress immediately and you get that delay, don't say, well, I guess I'll never get help. Get to a doctor.
That's very good advice, because there are waiting delays, but even psychiatric nurses you can sometimes get into and just see somebody and start the conversation. And yeah, that's really so important. I'm going to combine a couple reader questions as we're winding down here. One, you kind of answered this again, but I'll ask it again. You already alluded to it. Do you have any suggestion for people who are in denial, that you can see it, kind of like your wife could see it? And like, any thoughts on how you kind of gently suggest it? And the other is, what other speakers and books and podcasts do you look to that you like on this topic?
Wow. I mean, one thing I learned about living with a father and a brother who are addicts is that it's hard to convince somebody else that they have a problem. I think I know some people say, oh, hey, I was reading this really interesting article about people with depression and how it sneaks up on you and how you don't know. And most of the time somebody will like, I get it. I see what you're trying to do. And just end it with I wonder about you and I really care about you. I wonder if that's something you've looked at, or, hey, I read John Moe's book and he said this, so you could be kind of oblique about it, or, depending on the relationship and depending on who you are, you could just say, you could do like Jill Moe did and just say, hey, I'm worried about you. If you thought this, in terms of other people who I read, the William Styron book, whose name escapes me now. It's just a little slip of a thing. You could read it in an afternoon. It's still wonderful. I've been listening to a lot of Brene Brown podcasts because I think she just sort of lays the truth on the line in a really accessible but pretty deep way. I like, a lot of what I read is to kind of get away from the full-time depression job. So I could recommend the Bob Dylan memoir. But it's just like finding a therapist. Like, keep trying things until you find something that speaks to you. And then listen to yourself as you dive into that.
Well, it often can require that outside. So for that viewer, I mean, it's scary. I don't think I've ever, to be honest, been on the other side where I've suggested, I had a guy I didn't even know of, this colleague, who once came up to me and gave me an Eckhart Tolle book. I'm like, why does he give me an Eckhart Tolle book? But then I thought, oh, it's pretty obvious. And you wrote that in your book. It's like, people know. People
Yeah,
know.
you think you're being really clever, but like, come on.
Yeah.
People see it.
That gradually got me, and then I really looked to books. Like, that's why I think your book is making such an impact. But I read Styron's, I read Sylvia Plath's book, I read all the tough books because I was in a pretty bad way, and that kind of was comforting. And then I made the appointment. It took a while.
Yeah.
So and I love that in your book you at the end you mentioned several strategies. I don't want to give away all of them, but that people can try as far as, you know, livability stuff. Like your first one was get a dog, which everyone says, but you give a real great section of your book talking about dogs and also music. And I'm like,
Yep.
well, yeah, if these are things, as you say, you respond to, remember to do them. I mean,
Yep.
depression takes away your energy, so you have to kind of psych yourself into doing the things that it's tricky, but if you remember what you respond to, then just try to do them, I guess.
It's a bit of a Marie Kondo thing. Like, find the things in your mind that bring you joy, and throw out other things that are getting in the way. I mean, to me,
Yeah.
like just this afternoon, I watched a bunch of Bigfoot videos on YouTube. I don't know why it always makes me so happy, but it returns me to something basic and good in my mind. And I just don't question it. It works, you know, like, I mean, I've started doing meditation. I've started doing the John Kabat-Zinn mindfulness-based stress reduction meditations, and that works. And so you know, keep trying on. It's like pants, you know, keep trying on pants until you're like, oh, I like these pants, you know.
I love it. I know we're running short. I'm going to do one last question. I'm going to combine them again just because they're on your other great work. I mean, and I think most people here know, but we had one question about Wits and one question about Dear Luke, which I loved. Wits was this great variety show. I can list all your musical guests, and it was wonderful. So maybe if you can give one memory of your time on Wits. And then this person wants to know if you might do another book in the vein of Dear Luke. I mean, I love the Horowitz versus Horowitz lawsuit chapter, but
yeah, there's a lot of ideas in terms of books. I'll probably be on the mental health kick for a while, book wise, but I'm gonna continue writing for McSweeney's, and a lot of those ideas show up there. You know, in terms of Wits, there's so many great memories that when it ended, I kind of think we decided that it didn't. So we did one reunion show in the fall of 2019, and you know, I'm still really close with John Munson and Janie Winterbauer, who I feel like formed the heart of it with me. And we're planning to do more. I don't know if we'll record them. I don't know if we'll call them Wits, but you know, when we did that one show, we were planning to do a lot more. And so I expect that to resume, because it's a wonderful celebration of life, and you could call it Wits, but APM doesn't have a copyright on the idea of joy and performance, so we can go ahead and keep doing that for ourselves.
it was just right in my pocket. I loved it. You had literary conversations, sketch comedies, and musical guests. I had season tickets. Like,
well, I know that we can get a lot of those guests back in a hurry if we needed to. Like, if we were doing one and called up Neil Gaiman and he wasn't doing anything, he'd probably say, "Oh, I'll get on a plane," because we turned Neil Gaiman into a sketch comedy actor. He knew that was possible.
You had such impressive folks. I mean, you know, Josh Ritter to Rufus to Amy Mann. I adored it. I was so sad that it went off. And I'm glad you brought up the local band, because I think unfairly, I always focus on, oh God, that's right, I saw Josh Ritter that night. But Munson and Janie Winterbauer were always fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're fantastic.
What did you call them? They were the Wits.
The Witnesses.
Witnesses.
John Munson and the Witnesses. A lot of credit. I mean, just while we're on here, Larissa Anderson was the producer of that show, and she did a lot of great work getting that talent. And that show existed because of the the Legacy Amendment, just like this series, the Ducks and Dancers.
Oh.
That's how we got that one started. So, you know, I'm like, and when we were doing it, I'm like, oh, but it needs Minnesota talent. Who's the Minnesota talent? And somebody said, John, you've been here many years. You are now Minnesotan. I'm like, oh God, am I okay? So I still don't really understand hockey. And, you know, I still refer to hot dish as casserole, but apparently I'm Minnesotan enough. And that's what counts.
Well, I loved it. Well, I had a thought on went out of my head on the witnesses and on the music, but it was great. I had many. Oh, you once opened, you and I think Josh Ritter were decked up by Jaime's haberdashery. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Jaime's. We got a lot
And
of
I was
outfits from Jaime's.
I was like, what is that? I hadn't even heard of it. And then I went and bought shoes. So, you know, there you go. Well, John, this has been wonderful. I think we probably have to let you go. And any final thoughts? And then I'll do the wrap up.
No, I mean, Adam, thank you so much for this. And thanks to Carver County Library and for everybody who made this possible. It's a great way to connect with Brains and Hearts series like this. And it's so important. And you know, I think the pandemic has taught us the importance of libraries. And I think, like I said, support your local independent bookstore, support Red Balloon, support the one closest to you. There are, you know, just find it. You can buy your books online from those places. They're doing great work, and they're gonna help us, and they're gonna need our help beyond this too. So vote with your dollars to keep those folks going strong.
Absolutely. Yeah. Buy from Red Balloon, buy from Andy's. Try not to buy from Amazon. I mean, I occasionally do. I'm not a hypocrite, but I try not to. But and hopefully we can do more of these in person.
Yeah, and if there are large corporations that are connected to the arts, look warily at them and make sure to buy local.
Well, I think I'll do my little reading here, and then we can get on to our evening. So here we go. That's all we have time for this evening. Thanks again, John, for this time and this great book, which I plowed through in one sitting and just love. So I can't wait for the next format for your interviews. You're just the best, Adam.
Stay tuned. Thanks.
And
bye-bye, everybody.
thank you. And this is, and then I'll just I got a couple more. This is a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series by Melsa, which again I think sounds like Mensa, made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Carver County Library for the part they played in bringing John to us. Before you log off, look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of the video momentarily. Lastly, consider joining Club Book next Tuesday. Well, they got another one coming up just next week, March 16th, for a talk with New York Times bestselling novelist Mbolo Mboe. Hope I got that right. She had a great book called Behold the Dreamers, which I meant to read. And her new one's called How Beautiful We Were, a contemporary fable pitting a small African village against an American oil company. Ooh. It will be co-hosted by Ramsey County Library, and as always, it's free. They'll be right here on Facebook Live. All right. Thanks again, John. And I'm Adam Wahlberg. Have a great evening. This is fun.